It is that time of the week, and we have got a great weekend of college football up ahead. We've got Florida, LSU, we've got Penn State, Iowa, we've got Oklahoma, Texas, and we've got some underrated, under the radar games to keep an eye on as well. Oklahoma, Texas, I've already covered, and I believe Oklahoma's going to win. So we'll move on straight into Florida, LSU night game in Death Valley, one of the better atmospheres in college football. That's a very rude awakening incoming for Kyle Trask, who has not started a varsity football game on the road in like 5 years. That's going to provide quite the challenge at the end of the day. I think LSU is too good. I really like LSU's offense and Joe Burrow's odds to win the Heisman later this year. I think LSU is worth watching as a dark horse in the playoff picture, although I guess scratch that because they're not really a dark horse anymore, but they're definitely going to be worth watching down the road as this new approach that LSU has, I really like it. I think it's going to work really well for them this year down the road. And I think they're going to be too good, too much for Florida to handle on Saturday night. Another intriguing game and a really difficult one to pick is Penn State, Iowa on Saturday Night Football in Iowa City. Penn State, I believe, is the better team. If this were in Happy Valley, I would pick Penn State without much thought. But I think Iowa is going to be motivated. They're going to come ready to play after how bad they looked last week in Ann Arbor. And also, Penn State is a top 10 team going on the road to Iowa City. I have seen this in the over a decade that I have been watching college football. I have seen this story play out so many times. I've seen this happen before. I picked Iowa to upset Ohio State a couple of years ago. I picked them to upset Michigan the year before that. I'm going to pick Iowa again in an upset over Penn State on Saturday night as well. An under-the-radar game that's worth watching in the ACC is Louisville-Wake Forest on Saturday night. Scott Satterfield has already quietly done one of the better coaching jobs in the ACC this fall. Louisville's 3-2. He's won more games in his first 5 than Bobby Petrino did all last year. I don't think Louisville is going to be super good, but I do think that, and Louisville Wake Forest is already a pretty trendy upset pick. I think Wake Forest will be able to pull it out. I think Jamie Newman is the better quarterback. I think Wake Forest's offense is just too good, but I think it'll be a very close and entertaining game. And it'll definitely be one worth watching as Wake Forest and Virginia in the ACC both have their eyes set on that Orange Bowl berth at the end of the year, provided Clemson does not lose along the way. And speaking of Clemson, in a game that used to be the premier game of the year in the ACC, Clemson welcomes Florida State to Death Valley. Florida State has looked better over the last couple weeks. As for Dabo Swinney's they should be 5-0 comments, it's really simple. If they should be 5-0, they would be 5-0. They're not 5-0, so they shouldn't be 5-0. It's really that simple. I'm not sure what Dabo's playing at. Maybe it's to motivate his guys. I don't know, but that's false. If they should have been 5-0, they'd be 5-0. But I do think that Florida State and Willie Taggart, I think that they are starting to buy what Willie Taggart is selling, at least somewhat. I think Florida State has looked a lot better the last couple weeks. That's not to say they're anywhere near where they were a few years ago, but they're improving. And with the way Clemson played against North Carolina, I think Florida State has the athletes. That is one thing Florida State football will always have, is an abundance of athletes, even if they don't know how to coach them. But Florida State does have the athletes that Carolina did not have. And Florida State's got the athletes to maybe make it an interesting game. It might be worth watching for the first quarter, maybe the first half, just to see what Florida State's able to do on a Clemson team that's been criticized and bashed in the media for the last 2 weeks. Now, the flip side, as I'm kind of alluding to, is that Clemson gets pissed because they've been criticized and mocked and ridiculed for their ranking after that 1-point win over a pretty mediocre at best, maybe a decent North Carolina team, and Clemson just wins 56 to nothing. That's very possible too. I do think Clemson runs away with the game either way, but I do think Florida State's got the athletes and the playmakers to maybe make it interesting for a little while. Some other interesting games around the ACC. Virginia plays Miami tomorrow night in a game that's big for Virginia's Orange Bowl hopes. They can lose, I think, and still make it. I don't think one loss is make or break, especially since if Virginia loses, we're still at least in a tie for first in the Coastal. But it'd be nice to win, obviously. An intriguing game tonight between a Syracuse team that has been very disappointing thus far. Tommy DeVito obviously nowhere near as good as Eric Dungy. And another team that's been disappointing and has looked a whole lot worse than they have the last 2 years when they were ranked at some point in each of the last 2 years is NC State. Dave Doran has really not done a good job this year. I think NC State being favored by 5 by Vegas seems to be way off the mark. I like Syracuse to go into Raleigh and win. I'm not even sure NC State beating Carolina is as sure of a thing this year as it may have been the last few. Because even though North Carolina is not good or great or whatever yet, it's hard to say they're not better than State. I mean, NC State lost to West Virginia. NC State struggled against Ball State. What is going on up there? I mean, good Lord. The next thing NC State's going to do is next year they're going to try lose to East Carolina. I mean, Jesus Louises, what are they doing in Raleigh? I have no idea. Moving on to Group of 5 teams, there are quite a few interesting Group of 5 games this week, and I'm going to start in the American Athletic Conference, where 23rd ranked Memphis goes on the road to take on upset-minded Temple in a game that could very well end with Temple winning. It's a fascinating game. I think it's going to be a very close game and one worth watching because there are a lot of New Year's Six implications on the line for Memphis here. I like the Tigers to pull out a close one. But while I'm on the subject of the American Athletic Conference, people will say, oh, the American Athletic Conference is better than the ACC, and I can totally see why they think that, but they have to keep in mind that UCF did lose to Pittsburgh, who's the third or who's not even the best team in the Coastal Division right now. And Memphis did lose to Wake Forest in a bowl game last year, who was like the 4th or 5th best team in the Atlantic. So let's pump the brakes on that. I don't think there's a huge gap, but the Americans' top teams lost to middle of the pack teams in the ACC. And that says quite a lot. But back to the games in the American this week. Another big one is 25th ranked Cincinnati at Houston. Houston, I worry about as they've got nothing to lose. I think they've almost kind of given up on their season. I don't really know what's going on. A mess with the De'Aaron King situation. Cincinnati is another team that's right in line for a New Year's Six berth. It's going to be another, I think, fairly close game, but I do think Cincinnati pulls this one out. Moving on to the other Group of 5 conference of note, the Mountain West, a big game late Saturday night between Hawaii and Boise State. Hawaii has not beaten Boise State since the Colt Brennan Sugar Bowl team in 2007 did. They've never won on the blue turf, but they're also playing as well as they have arguably since that team that made the Sugar Bowl. I think it's going to be another game worth watching, but I do think Boise State has just too much in terms of playmakers and talent. I think they win a one-score game, say 35-31 over Hawaii. Hawaii needs Colt McDonald to play like he has the last few weeks and not like he did the first couple where he threw like 10 interceptions or whatever. A bit of a rapid fire round here quick before I go into some other stuff. Georgia's going to beat South Carolina. South Carolina's no match for Georgia. I actually think Tennessee is going to beat Mississippi State. I was really impressed by what I saw from Brian Maurer last week against Georgia. I think Tennessee is going to pull the upset over a really not good looking Mississippi State team. I believe Arizona State and Herm Edwards, what a job. I questioned their Arizona State's decision to hire Herm Edwards, and he has proven me wrong. Herm Edwards has done a terrific job, and he continues that as Arizona State beats struggling Washington State this weekend. In the SEC, Texas A&M could barely beat Arkansas, so yeah, they're not beating Alabama. Newsflash, it won't be close either. I think Wisconsin's going to keep rolling against Michigan State. They shouldn't have too much trouble there. I don't think it's going to be as close as people might think. Michigan State's offense still really can't score, so Wisconsin's going to win easily there. And some other interesting games in the Big Ten. Last but not least, I'll do Nebraska, Minnesota. Minnesota is not as good as their 5-0 record suggests. Unlike Baylor, who's 5-0 and deservedly ranked, they'll beat Texas Tech this weekend. I think Minnesota is going to lose at home to Nebraska this weekend. I don't think Nebraska is very good either, but I think they're better than Minnesota.